are you in the scheme of things? Do you sit silently in class? Or do you sit silently when you're at home at dinners? Or do you speak up like most Filipino women, right? You know, I'll tell you a bit of a story. This is about 8 years ago. I just started a wine business here in Cebu. And I was invited to this fabulous dinner. It was in the EDSA Shangri-La. In the EDSA Shangri-La. And after this fabulous dinner, I was satisfied. I was sitting in the back of my brand new tinted car, air-conditioned. And you know how it is when you sit in an air-conditioned car, you tend to see life through rose-tinted, right? Rose-tinted. Isn't it so easy to live in an air-conditioned car? I was half asleep, half drunk, and really full. I drank too much wine. And what I spent that night was about 3 times this figure. And by the way, you know what this figure is? This is the average monthly income of a family living in poverty in the Philippines. Sometime at about 1:30 in the morning, I heard this knocking on the window. And I woke up and I was so pissed off because someone dared knock on my window and interrupt my sleep. I looked at this guy. My first reaction was probably to glare at him. And then I saw this guy in the window going. So I stood up. You know, I just spent so much money. I looked around. This is under the Shaw overpass. And I looked around and I saw people sleeping all over the streets. Kids, women, men, beggars. A whole horde of beggars started coming to my car. Thankfully, the light turned green. But from that time on, I decided that something had to be done. And I would never, ever spend anywhere near this amount of money for my pleasure. Some statistics. Remember that number, 5,458? 78? Okay. You said it a while ago, the population of the Philippines. And 24.9% of the populations in the Philippines lives on this amount or less every month. That's family income. And if you look at the family size of the poorest people in the Philippines, they don't have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. They've got 7 or 8. Imagine 7 or 8 members of a family living on 5,458 a month. Let's go back a bit. I'm not even going to include the 1970 figure because there are more poor people today than there were people in the Philippines in the 70s and 60s. And I'm just using standard percentages here. The percentages haven't changed much. But in 1980, there were 11.3 million poor people in the Philippines. Today, 26.3. That means 1 out of every 4 Filipinos is living on less than 5,478 pesos a month. And you know what? Even if you double that, even if you double that to 10,800 pesos a month, a family of 5 or 6, are they still not poor? So in reality, the number of people living in poverty in the Philippines is probably double this amount. Cebu, our Cebu. By the way, I was born in Manila. I think I'm a Cebuano by choice. I've lived there for 21 years. And I love it. Fabulous, fabulous economic growth. They've always said Cebu's growth outpaces the Philippines. And you know what? We have. We are growing between 10 to 12% every year in GDP. We used to be one of the most livable cities in Asia. In fact, in the mid-1990s to late 1990s, Cebu was considered the 17th most livable city in Asia, and definitely the most livable in the Philippines. But we no longer even fit into the top 50. Cebu, the 3rd poorest province in the Philippines, with over 480,000 families living in poverty. We are number 475 out of 500 cities. This was in a 2009 Global Competitiveness Survey. I don't know how we are today. But basically, starting the early 2000s up till 2009, Cebu saw a very steady drop in its livability and its competitiveness. So are we victims of our own success? You guys know Jess Estanislao? Have you heard of him? Dr. Jess Estanislao? He was speaking to us in about 2006, a group of businessmen and leaders from civil society. And he said, the paradox of the Philippines and the reason why we have been unable to surmount or to grow over the last 50 years is simply this. The Philippines is made up of a nation of great people with lousy leaders. Politics is keeping this country down. Why? Because we all know that if you are in power and you are a politician of the Trapo sense, you want people to be under your control. And you are not interested in their well-being or their future or their development, or simply you just want to make money at their expense. Cebu, 2010, 2.5 million people. Our estimate by 2030 is 4.2 million people. Who take jeepneys here every day? Sarap, no? Isn't it the best form of transport in the world? You've got to smell all that pollution. You've got to smell your neighbor beside you, especially when it rains, diba? And they put down the windows, and you've got to sit in traffic day after day after day. Aren't you kind of tired of that? Don't you think that there was something better? Don't you think you deserve better? Imagine a Cebu today. Let's say we were 2030 and you had double the population. It'll probably take you 2 hours to get to school, right? There will be no clean air, no more trees left in Cebu. We will be so congested, crime will double, right? Imagine double the population. But this is called progress. It's called urbanization. We like to call it urban sprawl. And urban sprawl is like cancer. And what is urban sprawl? Urban sprawl is uncontrolled development. There are no plans, no objectives, no considerations for anything. The environment, the business environment, especially no consideration for the community or the commuters or the students. This is what happens when you have urban sprawl. This is urban sprawl. This is urban sprawl. That's Cebu. It's Cebu. But you know what? All around the world, you have this urbanization happening. You have people moving to the cities because that's where the jobs are. But you know what? Around the world, people are managing this sprawl. They're planning. You know, they're planning, they have groups of experts. Like if you go, for example, to the city of Yokohama, their city planning division has 120 architects, engineers, environmental planners, urban planners. You will be hard-pressed to find one LGU in Cebu where there's more than 1 or 2 or 3 untrained urban planners. Why aren't we doing this? Why aren't we managing it? You know, a friend of mine once said, you know what the problem with the Philippines is? I said, what? We don't solve our problems. Right? We don't. And you have to ask yourself, why not? What's wrong with solving problems? You know, you guys we guys, especially businessmen, we see a problem, we want to solve it. And for the most part, we're able to see a solution quite clearly, but don't expect that of some of our leaders. We have some really good leaders today, and we have some really poor leaders today. Ay, nako. At that event where Jesse Stanislaw spoke to us, he said one thing, and this I really took to heart. He goes, how can you expect progress to occur when we have a political system that is so short-term in its thinking? In other words, if you're a mayor or a congressman, you have 3 years to do something. And 3 years is just too short. And we all know that what usually happens in the Philippines is that if you lose the election, your successor will come in and change everything you did, whether good or bad. Everything. So what Dr. Jess suggested was, why don't you business and civil society leaders get together and have a voice and speak with a voice? Because we including you guys, have the ability to surmount and surpass whatever political trends there are. We can ask for more. We should ask for more. We should ask for performance from our leaders. We should ask them to consider you guys who have to take those stupid jeepneys that cause so much traffic and pollution. Imagine what that's doing to your lungs, by the way. Diba? The voice of the people. Vox populi. We can make this work. We have a voice. We have to use it. I think it's a, I learned this when I was in college 30 years ago. It was either Jean-Jacques Rousseau or Gabriel Marcel who said, an idea in the mind of a young man, woman, is a dangerous weapon. Why? Because you guys are still idealists. You guys still have a future. You guys still want a future. It's the only way we can have a consistent approach to governance in this country. It's the only way we can move forward to development. You need a voice, but you also need to plan. Another problem of the Philippines, there's plenty of development plans, and none of them are being implemented. Cebu should have no traffic today. None. This should have been solved in the 1980s. But the plans were thrown out because of political issues. By issues, I mean political selfishness, to put it bluntly. And who's suffering? You guys, not me. I have my air-conditioned car. Huh? Which, by the way, I earned. I started from scratch. I love Peter Drucker. How can you get anything done if you don't have a plan? But of course, what's really critical too is that if you do have a plan, what are you going to do to implement it? And this is where we began to think. Government and people working together. We found out by about 2009 that most of our LGU leaders, believe it or not, were worried and had the same concerns. And we said, bingo! You guys are worried about traffic. You are worried about peace and order like us. We're worried about jobs. We're worried about lack of investments. You are too. Fantastic. And then it began to all fall into place. Planning. The need for collaboration and the need for planning. But what's the first step in planning? Anyone take strategic management here? Huh? Visioning. What do you want Cebu to be? A place that you can walk to work or walk to school? Under trees? No? A place with sidewalks? Yes. You could go biking, for example, if you wanted to. You wouldn't be worried about getting lung cancer or getting hit by a jeepney, right? Or by a motorcycle. What else do you want? You want parks? Open spaces? You want culture? You want a real respect for the Cebuano culture, the language, the heritage, the history, the religion? Yes. And why are so many places in the world able to do this and we are not? Why? Because you guys have been quiet. I'd like to share Peter Drucker again. You're worried about your future? You're worried about finding a job? But you know what? It's in your hands. Because the only way is we've got to decide what we want to do to our lives, and we develop a plan, and we move with that plan.